Society of the Snow tells the true story of a 1972 plane crash that ultimately led to the death of many of its passengers, but the fate of one of the victims caused an unusually compelling sequence of events. Although a handful of the flight's passengers perished during the accident itself, many of the plane's inhabitants survived the inhospitable environment in which they found themselves. However, not everyone endured long enough to be rescued. Flight 571 crash-landed in the barren wasteland of the Andes, and the Society of the Snow cast are all representations of real people. While the severe cold was a huge obstacle when it came to the group's survival, their lack of food and medicine to treat the injured also took several lives. Many of the plane's passengers escaped the crash without any physical injuries, but others were forced to withstand their wounds for as long as they could without succumbing to them. For one victim in particular, their Society of the Snow ending didn't tell their whole story. What happened to Rafael Echeverren in Society of the Snow? The character shared the same fate as his real-world counterpart. Rafael El Vasco Echeverren was part of the unfortunate group that was injured when the plane fell to the mountainside. Although his friends tried their best to care for him, they were very limited in what they could do without any supplies or medical equipment. As a result, many of Vasco's scenes post-crash feature him in an improvised hammock within the remaining portion of the plane's fuselage. Although not shown, Vasco likely developed severe bed sores, similar to his other injured companions. Vasco, played by Benjamin Segura in the movie, is shown to deteriorate as time goes on. Although he survives for an impressive amount of time given his circumstances, his infected wounds finally prove too much for him to overcome roughly an hour into the runtime of Society of the Snow. Just before he passes, Vasco becomes upsettingly frustrated, calling for his absent father in his final moments. The on-screen graphic following Vasco's final scene shows he was just 22 years old when he passed away. Rafael Echeverren's father tried to recover his son's body after the Andes plane crash. Society of the Snow didn't show everything. Society of the Snow characters outside the plane's fuselage. Although Vasco's father wasn't with him when he died, the older man became heavily involved after the survivors were rescued. Society of the Snow's cannibalism scenes show what the group had to do to survive, eating their dead to avoid their demise. So, although the remains of the deceased were incomplete, there were still bones and other body parts for bereaved families to potentially bury. According to modern mummies, the preservation of the human body in the 20th century, there was a mass burial orchestrated on the mountainside in the wake of the survivors being rescued. When the remaining passengers returned to civilization, Vasco's father, Ricardo Echeverren, stated he did not wish for his son to be buried in a mass grave. Although he failed to prevent the ceremony from taking place, Ricardo paid the priest to mark the bag that contained his son's remains. He planned to embark on an expedition to recover what remained of his son and give him an individual burial. Although he achieved his goal, Ricardo Echeverren suffered repercussions for his actions. Ricardo Echeverren's arrest for grave robbery and release explained. Vasco's father encountered some legal issues. Daniel Maspons, Santiago Vaca Narvaja, climbing up a mountain in Society of the Snow. Ricardo's mission to recover his son's remains was unsanctioned by Argentinian authorities. When he returned with Vasco's body bag, Ricardo Echeverren was arrested for grave robbery. While this may seem harsh, it aligned with the laws at the time. However, Ricardo's punishment didn't stick, and the charges were dropped soon after he returned from his expedition. He also didn't recover the remains of any other members of the deceased in the mass grave. As a result of being released from police custody, Echeverren was free to give Vasco a proper burial, arranging for a funeral ceremony in their hometown of Montevideo, the Uruguayan capital. For understandable reasons, none of this was included in Netflix's movie adaptation of events. While the film has been made to be as historically accurate as possible, it's still a movie and therefore requires a satisfying conclusion. To have the survivors be rescued near the end of the movie and then witness Ricardo Echeverren's legal battles would have been an unusual structure for a feature film. However, the details of how Vasco's father successfully exhumed his son's remains would make for an interesting story independent of the 2024 release. Just as Ethan Hawke's 1993 Alive focuses on the final journey to Chile, a movie could work if it focused on Ricardo Echeverren's post-rescue endeavors. As it stands, Society of the Snow ends on a feel-good note, with those able to endure the terrifying conditions being rescued.